Good morning, everyone. Thanks all for being here, and I just thought I'd give a quick update on where we're up to with the Progeny Test Program and its current progress. So what I plan on talking about is obviously where are we up to. We're 5 years in, we've got a lot of data, we've got a lot of things happening. So we'll go through where we're up to for each cohort. We'll talk about the cohort 1 carcass data, the days on feed, and maybe some preliminary data and what it's showing. Cohort 2 will give a quick update where they're up to, because obviously they're our next ones coming through. And cohort 6 nominations, we're sort of planning to open in January, and then how you'll do that and what's happening there. So cohort 1, we've had most of our carcasses processed at the moment, so we've got about 390, and then our females have had just about their 2 natural joins. So cohort 2, we have all of our steers in the feedlot at the moment, so all of them are on feed, and then our females are up to their first joining and potentially moving on to their second joining, depending on where their age is at and when they were born. Cohort 3, so we've got all of our calves have been weaned for cohort 3, and obviously just backgrounding. And some of the older calves, depending on when they were born, are starting to move into feedlots as well. Cohort 4, our last of our cohort 4s were AI'd in May this year, and there's sort of a big range of ages for those ones. And some of the calves are actually on the ground having been DNA tested and registered as well. So we're sort of running from AIing to registrations in that one. Cohort 5, we have had 4 programs so far. So we've joined 750 this year for them. And we've got 2 more programs this week, so we're joining about 400 literally this week, at the end of this week, and then the remaining of those will be happening later in the year. So we'll join about another 1,000. For cohort 6, as I said, we're sort of expecting to open in January 2026, and we'll talk about that a little bit further on how you can nominate. So as a quick snapshot of what we've done so far through the program, we've got about 2,500 calves that have been DNA tested and registered, keeping in mind that some of them haven't actually been DNA tested and registered yet, so I would expect those calves on the ground numbers to be around 3,000, so it's pretty good numbers. We've joined sort of over 6,000 straws. Those 6,000 straws have been put into cows for AI programs. We've tested there's 125 sires that are in the program, 25 of whom are international. 390 carcasses from our cohort 1, with a couple, I think it's about 50 left, and we have 15 different contributor herds, a couple which have come on board this year, and a few more that have expressed interest for next year. So the program really starts to sort of seem like it's ramping up, lots of stuff going on. So I thought I'd just give a quick shout out to our contributor herds, because obviously they played a large part in the success of the Progeny Test Program. We're fortunate enough to have brought on 2 new contributor herds this year. So we have Kanana Station in Grafton, or near Grafton, and Ballarook, which is in Coleraine in Victoria. So we're very much looking forward to working with them throughout the program. So having these 2 additional herds sort of strengthens the benefits of the program by adding additional environments. Obviously, Ballarook is the only ones that are in Victoria, so we're experiencing different environmental conditions down there, and Kanana is sort of close to the coast in New South Wales, so again, different environmental conditions for the program. So we're extremely grateful to have them on board and have our contributor herds and their dedication to our data collection. So you might have seen this one a little bit. This is the most recent update on our carcass numbers per sire. So the number of carcasses is dependent on, obviously, female-male ratios. So the number can vary, obviously, and does vary quite a bit across each sire. So on average, we were expecting about 11 steers, which includes any losses that happen on farm. Obviously, that's inevitable. And at this stage, we're sitting at 10.2 per sire on average. So at this stage, we're well and truly on track to make sure that we have 11 steers per sire. So I've presented something similar at the conference and over the regional workshops, but just for anyone that I suppose hasn't seen this, it is a list of our cohort 1 sires and their marble scores, EBVs. So the first table on the left is the EBV in October 2024, before any carcass data was submitted through the PTP. And the middle table is from June, when we had some data submitted, and the last table is the most recent November marble score EBV. So in the first table, I've highlighted the top 10 marble score sires in green and the bottom ones in orange, which sort of helps to visually track what's happening over time and what the data is doing to the EBVs. So I'll go through, there's just a couple of different things I'd like to point out with these. The first one that I'd point out is the accuracies. So as we know, as an accuracy increases, there's sort of less likely to be significant shifts in our EBVs. So the Progeny Test Program, it started in 2021. So the first table is the EBV for October 2024. So basically why we started in October 24 and we're looking from October 24 is that some of these sires were old enough to already have, when they were nominated, to have progeny on the ground and potentially going through processing, that sort of stuff, or they were going to end up experiencing that. So we're using that to track the actual PTP data and how it influenced as such. So you'll notice that some of those sires do already have high accuracies, so we would expect to see less or minimal changes, which we sort of do throughout those tables. So the next one, we're still sitting on accuracy, is that, there's sires in this table that were lower accuracies of the groups. So two of these sires that I've got highlighted here, when they were nominated in 2021, they were only 12 months of age. So they were less likely to have calves on the ground before the program could start submitting data, if that makes sense. So R352, I've got highlighted there in, I think it's the blue. He jumped from a 2.2 marble score to a 2.7, and he's now up to a 3. With a low accuracy, that's what we would expect. N185 jumped from a 2.2 to a 2.9, and is now up to a 3.2. He's highlighted in pink. So we can see that some of the sires have changed slightly, and the ones that had EBVs and were changing were the lower accuracies. So as we move into having most of the data collected in the November graph, we can see that the lowest accuracy is 78%. So we were sort of aiming through the program to increase accuracies to about 80%, so that's well on track. So some of those sires have shifted from sort of a 67% accuracy to a 78, which is great, which is what we were expecting. So another interesting point to notice is that the range of the EBVs from each table sort of increases over time, meaning it's sort of spreading sires further and further apart. So for example, in October, the top marble score ranges from a 4.2 to a 0.5, so there's about a 3.7 variation in marble score between sires. as we move further with the data collection, in November it sort of ranges from a 4.8 to a negative 0.1, making a range of 4.6. So showing more variation within the groups, this group of size. So, and lastly, as most you would be aware, we're sort of starting to see the marble scores of EBVs creep up. The most recent top 100 size ranked on marble score now shows that a sire with a marble score of 5.1, granted he only has an accuracy of 68%, so there's obviously still room for movement in that EBV, but we get a lot of questions about, you know, what does a marble score 3.6 or a 4.2 in the Progeny Test Program look like in their contemporary groups? So let's have a look. I'll move on to now the top 3 sires and their progeny within contemporary groups and how they sit and what's happening in them, with them. So this is a box plot that represents the contemporary groups from cohort 1. So the group you can see along the bottom and up the side is the raw camera marble percentages, which was collected by MIJ camera. So for this sire, he has obviously seven carcasses with an average of 39.5% in the camera marbling percentage. So you can see for each contemporary group, he's sitting well above average, which you would expect with a current marble score of 4.5. So he started out at 4.2 and moved up to a 4.5. Obviously, his data has influenced that change. So consistency, so basically what we're seeing here is that the consistency of being above average for a contemporary group really works favourably for these EBVs. And just for, I suppose, awareness, the average contemporary group, the average camera marble percent, for the whole 390 carcasses is 30.7, so he's obviously 39.5. So if we look at a second sire, Q102, he started off with a marble score of 3.6, and over time, based on his data collection, he's risen to a 4.2. So 14 carcasses, he had an average camera marble percent of 38.25. He's well represented across multiple herds, so multiple environments, all different stuff. So, all but 2 carcasses are above average in their contemporary groups. So if we sort of focused on those 2 lower results, if we looked at those and only saw those within their contemporary groups, we would sort of could potentially make a sort of wrong assumption on his potential and his future potential. So this is our third sire. He started out with a marble score of 3.6 in 24 and has sort of remained fairly constant. He had a higher EBV accuracy, and his average camera marble percent is 33.4%. So then if we put them all together, they collectively had an average of 38.25, and you can clearly see that majority of their carcasses actually sit above average, indicating that an above average EBV aids in producing carcasses that are above average within their contemporary groups. So that's what we're expecting. So I suppose one thing to remember as well is that we're only comparing sires, it looks deceiving there, but we're only comparing sires within their contemporary groups. We don't compare across. So each group itself, we look at where those sires sit and how they rank, so that, you know, we're not looking at different environmental factors, that sort of stuff. So most of you would have seen a similar images from the conference with actually a different sire. So in the conference I used M352. We had a kill in August this year, and we have these 4 carcasses that came out of a contemporary group again, so with the same sire. So all these carcasses were raised together, they were born together, raised together, and they were killed together. So KSWFR 327 is an international sire. And as you can see, their marble score, EBV, I've noted up there, 0.7, 1.12, and 2.9. If we were then to look at the camera marble percentage, we can see how it tends to line up with the EBVs. So as you know, we sort of can see significant variation within these contemporary groups. And I suppose a factor to consider with these is obviously a dam influence. And if we only saw the images, I suppose, on the right, the lower marble percent ones, we'd sort of be disappointed, in the results and potentially cull him and, get rid of a reasonably good bull. So the more carcasses you have, the more you'll feel better about the average performance. So in short, you want to have plenty of carcasses to give you a good, accurate representation of the performance. I know we all love seeing carcass images, so I thought I'd throw a few more up to show you the difference results we're seeing through the program. The 4 carcasses on the left are by Q102. We saw his results earlier. And the 4 on the right are from Michifuku. So just as a comparison, Michifuku, his average marble percent was 30.37 over 10 carcasses with 6 different contemporary groups. Q102 is an average marble percent of 38.25 over 14 carcasses and 9 different contemporary groups. So most of these, obviously these carcasses are from different contemporary groups, but it's a great reminder that your sires are actively being tested through various different environments to help sort of discover their full potential. So when we have solely contemporary groups and test sires in different environments, we can start to see our larger shifts in EBVs and their accuracies. So this table's from our cohort 1, it's sort of the most recent changes and their current accuracy changes. So they've occurred between January 2022 to November 25. So the darker the blue, the larger the increase. Depending on what data was submitted before and outside the program sort of directly impacts on these changes. So if an animal is a high accuracy trait, there's sort of less opportunity for movement. So for example, our benchmark sire, Michifuku, which is the 3rd from the bottom, he started with a reasonably high accuracy for traits and therefore he's had limited movement. Most of his traits are all white and 1%. So that's expected. Traits such as milk obviously take longer to change, needing daughters, to have calves. So again, most of those are sort of the lower or lighter colour blue to white. So we're sort of in this table, which is good. We're starting to see less and less white. We're sort of seeing the darker blue, so we're seeing large changes in our accuracies. So before I wrap up discussing our cohort 1 carcass data, this is sort of very, very preliminary data looking at the Progeny Test Program steers, the camera marble percent, and their days on feed. So along the bottom, we have a group of 400 to 450 days. Second is 450 to 500 days, 500 to 550, and 550 plus. And then the camera marble percent is on the vertical axis. Through the program, we've obviously got different feedlots feeding for various amounts of days. And depending on different programs, they're individual. Each group would probably have an individual program. So the feeding regimes and feed types and that would differ. But as you can see with the 390-ish carcasses we've got, an increase in the number of days on feed only sort of tends to increase the average camera marble percent by 2.3. Compared to the lower number of 400 to 450 days versus the higher 550 plus. So And you can also see in the 550 plus, we also still see a drop down to a 17% camera marble percentage in sort of the longer feed group. So contrary to popular belief, feeding them for longer doesn't necessarily significantly increase their marbling. Again, 390 carcasses, but it was sort of interesting to look at and point out. I also get a lot of questions about the days on feed and how it influences EBVs. So here's a good example of Q102. We've seen the results throughout the presentation. He's fortunate enough to be represented in each of these days on feed groups. As you can see there in the shorter fed group, progeny performance, he's still sitting above average. Breed plan sort of only considers animals within a contemporary group. If producer was sort of to feed the group for 600 days, you can see in the 550 plus, he's still sitting above average. So whether he's being fed short or long, he's still sitting above average. So feeding animals for longer doesn't necessarily change or have huge impacts on the EBVs. So, sorry to explain better. If a producer was feeding for 600 days and another was producing for 400 days, they'd not be compared against each other. The results are such, they're in a contemporary group. The data is only compared and the results are only compared within that contemporary group. So even if you feed for 600 days, you're producing, we're expecting to produce high marbling, the EBVs wouldn't be influenced as much as what you'd sort of think because they're just in a contemporary group. So all the other size within that larger, the 550 plus, would sit within that and yeah. So I also just wanted to give a quick update on our cohort 2, a few stats of where they're up to. So they'll begin to be processed in January next year. So this is just our numbers of calves per sire. We're well on track for what we're expecting. So obviously half of those would probably be steers and be in the feedlot. So we have 948 cohort 2 calves registered. Their gestation lengths range from 262 days to 300 days with an average of 285. Birth weights between 14 and 44 kilos with an average of 29. Then if we wanted to have a look at their 200-day weights, this is a quick comparison between cohort 1 and cohort 2, seeing very similar averages. These results, this one's 167 kilos for average 200-day weight, and then the results for cohort 1 were 165, so very similar. So a bit of a processing timeline. So all our cohort 2 steers are now on feed. And as I mentioned earlier, processing will happen in January, and depending on the days on feed for individual feedlots, etc., the last steers we'd sort of expect to be processed in December 2026 for cohort 2. So I also just wanted to touch on a bit of the value of the Progeny Test Program. Obviously, you can use the program to prove your young size with limited risk. We take the straws, we put them into cows, we collect all that data. Obviously leads into effective data collection. We have setups, we're collecting 200, 400, 600-day weights, carcass traits, making sure that they're all being submitted to breed plan at the moment, obviously moving on to Wagyu EBVs. We're going to increase, obviously the increase in accuracy for those sires is a huge benefit. You know how your sire is going to perform if you're increasing your accuracy. You'll have access to the data visualization and benchmarking tools through Power BI. The semen tender, depending on which nomination you use. You'll have straws sold, so obviously more data collection through industry, and you'll have access to partnership companies, which is a huge benefit. So obviously we're up to cohort 6 sire nominations. I just thought I'd get in early and start talking about those because, we've only got, at this stage, we've only got 2 more years left. So we want to make sure that we can kind of access as many sires as we can in these last couple of years. So if you're thinking about nominating a sire, I would recommend reaching out so we can make sure that you don't miss any deadlines. And while you're taking the opportunity to wait for nominations to open, we'll expect them to open in January. There'll be an easy nomination link where you just go in and put your details in for the sire, etc., and nominate that way. But I would probably start preparing for collection. Obviously, we know that semen's produced fairly early on, and getting them ready, high nutrition, making sure they're in tip-top shape for semen collection would be ideal, making sure that we've got good quality for the program. So a total of 260 straws are needed for the program. So that gives you a good range of time and opportunity to make sure you've got those straws ready, collected for delivery dates in around May 2026. So that's all I had for today. Thank you very much.